Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive what if Deku was a fishman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The heat was a physical enemy. It wasn't just the sweltering humidity of a Muzutafo summer that pressed in on Izuku Midoriya. It was a deeper, more personal assault. The sun baked the concrete jungle, and the air grew thin and dry. A thief that stole the moisture from his skin and the strength from his limbs. He kept his head down as he walked, the worn strap of his yellow backpack digging into his shoulder. Around his neck, a place that should have been bare to catch any hint of a breeze, was a dark green scarf. It was thin, more for appearance than warmth, but it was suffocating all the same. It itched. It was always itching. Beneath the fabric, tucked away on either side of his neck, were three faint, parallel slits. His gills, a secret he'd carried his entire life, a biological brand that set him apart more definitively than any quirk, or lack thereof, ever could. He adjusted the scarf, his fingers brushing over the slight ridges. They felt dry, almost papery in the oppressive heat. A familiar pang of anxiety, low and constant like the hum of a refrigerator, resonated in his chest. He needed water. Not just to drink, though his throat was parched, but to be in. To submerge. To let the life-giving liquid soothe the persistent, low-grade irritation of a body not quite designed for a world of asphalt and exhaust fumes. This feeling, this constant vulnerability to the very air he breathed, was the foundation of his existence. It was the reason for the scarf, the reason he avoided gym class on particularly hot days, and the reason for the cold, clinical words of a doctor a decade ago. Words that had defined his world ever since. 10 years earlier, the room was sterile white, smelling of antiseptic and recycled air. A 4-year-old Izuku sat on a crinkly paper sheet, his little legs dangling high above the floor. His all-might action figure was clutched in one hand, a plastic totem of everything he wanted to be. His mother, Inko, stood beside the examination table, her hands wrung so tightly her knuckles were white. The man across from them was Dr. Tsubasa, a kind-looking, balding man with large, round glasses. The kindness did not reach his eyes. He held up an X-ray, the image of a small foot glowing on the light panel behind him. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," he began, his voice devoid of warmth, "the good news is your son does not possess the extra joint in his pinky toe. He's part of the evolved 80% of the population." Izuku beamed, his oversized green eyes sparkling. He knew what that meant. It meant he could have a quirk. He could be a hero like All Might. Inko let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Oh, thank goodness. So, his quirk will manifest soon? The strength he has, is that. Dr. Tsubasa set the X-ray down with a soft click and turned to face them fully, his expression shifting from neutral to something more like detached curiosity, the way a biologist might look at a strange new beetle. That's where we run into a complication. The tests we ran on his blood and tissue samples show no active quirk factor. Genetically, he is quirkless. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Izuku's smile faltered. The All Might figure suddenly felt heavy in his hand. He looked at his mother, whose face had crumpled in on itself, a mask of pure devastation. "Quirkless?" Inko whispered, the words catching in her throat. "But, the doctor in our neighborhood said, he's so strong." He lifted a heavy bookcase that fell. "He's stronger than any of the other children." "He is," Dr. Tsubasa agreed, adjusting his glasses. "His musculature is approximately 10 times denser than that of a normal human child. His bone structure is similarly robust. This, however, is not a quirk. A quirk is a specific, superhuman ability stemming from a unique genetic marker. What your son has, is a racial trait." He picked up a tablet, swiping through several screens before turning it to face Inko. On it were complex genetic charts and biological diagrams Izuku couldn't understand. But he did understand the image next to them, a drawing of a powerfully built humanoid figure with webbed hands and gills on its neck. "Based on our analysis," the doctor continued, his tone becoming more academic, "Izuku's unique physiology is the result of a dormant, or perhaps recessive, genetic lineage resurfacing. It's an atavistic anomaly. He is, for all intents and purposes, a demi-human. A throwback. Specifically, his traits align closely with that of a whale shark fishman. The word hung in the air. Fishman. It sounded like something out of a monster movie, not a medical diagnosis. The doctor, sensing their confusion, pointed a sterile finger at Izuku's freckled cheeks. These markings, for instance. Not just freckles. They mimic the spotting patterns of the species. The strength, the durability, and he leaned forward slightly, the vestigial gills on his neck. They're functional, aren't they, son? Do you ever feel an urge to hold your breath underwater? Izuku, terrified, could only nod mutely. He remembered a time at the public pool when he'd sunk to the bottom and just stayed there, watching the shimmering light on the surface, feeling perfectly calm, perfectly at home, until his mother's frantic screams had pulled him back to the world of air. Inko's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping. His father, she began, but her voice failed her. Dr. Tsubasa nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. It would seem so. Your husband's side of the family must have carried this genetic trait. As for Izuku's official registration, he will be classified as quirkless. His strength is not a power he can turn on or off, it's a fundamental part of his biology. Like a bird having hollow bones to fly. It's simply what he is. The doctor stood, signaling the end of the appointment. His final words were delivered with a chilling finality that would echo in Izuku's mind for the next decade. Mrs. Midoriya, I would advise you to be discreet about this. Society has a complicated relationship with significant mutations that aren't classified as quirks. People celebrate quirks. They fear anomalies. For his own safety, and to avoid unpleasantness, it would be best if he were just seen as a normal, quirkless boy. That night, Izuku didn't watch his favorite All Might video. He sat in his darkened room, his small hands tracing the hidden slits on his neck. He wasn't like All Might. He wasn't even like his classmates. He was a monster. A throwback. A secret that had to be hidden under a scarf. So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. The teacher's voice dragged Izuku back to the present. He blinked, the harsh fluorescent lights of the classroom momentarily blinding him. He'd been lost in the memory, the ghost of that clinical smell still in his nostrils. He glanced around. His classmates were buzzing with the typical end-of-year energy. I would hand out these career aptitude tests, the teacher said, a stack of papers in his hand, but why bother? He tossed them into the air with a flourish. I know you all want to go to the hero track. The classroom erupted. Students showed off their quirks, stretching fingers, hardening skin, creating small sparks. It was a cacophony of normal, celebrated power. Izuku just sank lower in his seat, his hand instinctively going to his scarf. Yes, you've all got some very impressive quirks, the teacher said, trying to regain control. But no using powers in school. A familiar, arrogant voice cut through the noise like a crack of lightning. Teach, don't lump me in with this bunch of losers. Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet propped up on his desk, a contemptuous smirk plastered on his face. I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm aiming for the top. I'm going to UA, the class murmured in awe. UA High, the #1 hero academy in Japan. It was a pipe dream for most. I aced the mock exam. Bakugo crowed, puffing out his chest. I'm the only one at this garbage school who could get in. I'll surpass All Might himself and become the greatest hero of all time. The teacher shuffled through his papers. Oh, that's right. Midoriya, you wanted to go to UA too, didn't you? The world stopped. Every eye in the room swiveled to fix on Izuku. The air crackled with a sudden, tense silence, which was immediately shattered by uproarious laughter. It was a cruel, familiar sound. Midoriya? No way. You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do? Izuku felt his face burn with shame. They got rid of that rule. I could be the first one. He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Before he could finish, a blistering explosion sent his desk flying. He was thrown backward, landing hard against the wall. Bakugo stood over him, smoke wafting from his palms, his red eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. Listen up, Deku, he snarled, the insult a well-worn groove between them. But Bakugo's taunts were different from the others. They weren't just about being quirkless. They were sharper, more personal. No, not Deku. Fishku. The new nickname sent a fresh wave of humiliation through Izuku. You think you can stand in the same ring as me? Bakugo leaned in closer, his voice a low, threatening hiss. The heat from his quirk was intense, making the air around Izuku's head shimmer, and his skin feel tight and dry. It was a targeted attack, and they both knew it. You're worse than these rejects. You're not even fully human. You're just a piece of pond scum with delusions of grandeur. A monster who thinks he can be a hero. Don't make me laugh. You'd die in the exams, you fish freak. Izuku couldn't meet his eyes. He stared at the floor, his fists clenched. He couldn't fight back. Not because he was weak. In fact, the opposite was true. A deep, primal part of him knew, with absolute certainty, that he could break Bakugo's arm with a single, thoughtless squeeze. His innate monstrous strength was a coiled serpent in his gut, but that was the problem. Using it would prove Bakugo right. It would make him a monster. So he endured. He always endured. The bell rang, saving him. As the other students filed out, chattering about their plans, Izuku packed his bag, his hands shaking. He reached for his hero analysis notebook, his one true comfort, but Bakugo snatched it from his grasp. Hero analysis for the future? Bakugo read the title with a sneer. Still playing pretend? With a casual, devastating movement, he slammed the notebook between his palms and set off an explosion. The cover was charred, the edges blackened. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it out the open window. Izuku cried out as it sailed through the air and landed with a soft plop in the koi pond below. If you're so desperate to be a hero, Fishku, Bakugo said, his voice chillingly flat as he paused at the door, I've got a time-saving idea for you. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. Maybe you'll come back as something useful. The door slammed shut, leaving Izuku in a silent, empty classroom, the smell of burnt sugar and ozone hanging in the air. For a long moment, he just stood there, Bakugo's words echoing in his ears. He wasn't just being told he was useless. He was being told he was a creature that didn't deserve to exist. He trudged downstairs and retrieved his soggy, ruined notebook from the pond. The water felt cool and welcoming against his skin. He gently squeezed the water from the pages, his heart aching. It's not a toy, it's my dream. As he walked home, taking the long way to avoid anyone, his mind replayed Bakugo's words. A monster who thinks he can be a hero. Was he right? His strength wasn't a gift. It was a curse, a biological fluke that made him an outcast in a world obsessed with quirks. What hero had gills? What hero had to worry about dehydrating on a hot day? He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the strange, gurgling sound coming from the underpass ahead until it was too late. A monstrous form of green sludge erupted from a manhole cover, its two large, manic eyes fixing on him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain gurgled, its voice thick and wet. You'll do perfectly. Before Izuku could even scream, the sludge was on him. It forced its way into his mouth and nose, a suffocating, putrid tide. He clawed at the gelatinous body, his feet scrabbling for purchase, but it was like trying to punch water. His lungs burned. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. I'm dying. I'm going to die. But as his vision began to tunnel, something else kicked in. Not thought, not strategy, but pure, desperate instinct. The serpent of strength in his gut uncoiled. His muscles, 10 times denser than humanly possible, bunched and tensed. It wasn't a quirk activating. It was his very biology screaming for survival. With a primal roar that was lost in the sludge, Izuku thrashed. He brought his fists down, not with technique, but with the raw, untamed force of his fishman heritage. The impact wasn't a sharp crack, it was a deep, resonant THOM. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy. The sludge villain reeled back, its form momentarily losing cohesion. What the? This kid, he's strong. The brief reprieve was all that was needed. Texas smash. A hurricane of wind pressure tore through the underpass. The sludge villain was blasted apart, splattering against the concrete walls in 1,000 gooey droplets. Izuku collapsed to the ground, gasping, the air tasting impossibly sweet. Looming over him was a mountain of a man, his iconic Golden Age costume unmistakable, his two signature tufts of hair standing like triumphant horns. "Have no fear, young man," All Might boomed, his smile as bright as the sun. "For I am here." Izuku could only stare, his mind a whirlwind of shock and awe. All Might. The symbol of peace. Here. All Might quickly gathered the splattered villain into a soda bottle. As he went to check on Izuku, his ever-present smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His professional gaze swept over the boy, noting the slight, almost imperceptible slits on his neck, barely visible now that the scarf had been knocked askew. He'd felt the sheer physical power in the boy's desperate struggles, a strength that felt different from a typical enhancement quirk. Denser. More fundamental. He filed the observation away. "Glad you're okay," he said, his smile returning to full wattage. He gave Izuku a thumbs up and signed his now soggy notebook. Izuku was in a daze, his mind racing. This was his chance. He had to ask. He had to know. After a brief, awkward exchange where Izuku clung to his leg as he jumped, they landed on a nearby rooftop. This was it. The moment of truth. But before Izuku could ask his question, All Might was engulfed in a cloud of steam. When it cleared, the muscular hero was gone, replaced by a skeletal, emaciated man coughing up blood. Izuku screamed. The explanation that followed was a torrent of harsh realities. A grievous injury, a time limit, the truth behind the smiling symbol. It was a hero's deepest secret, laid bare on a sun-drenched rooftop. Izuku listened, his own problems momentarily forgotten in the face of his idol's shocking vulnerability. But his question, the one that had defined his entire life, still burned on his tongue. He had to ask. He took a deep breath, the dry city air scratching his throat. "Even with this injury, you're still smiling, still saving people. It's amazing. So, I have to ask." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "Even if I don't have a quirk, can I still be a hero? Can someone like me, who isn't normal, who is different, ever hope to be a hero like you?" He looked up, his eyes pleading. He didn't dare mention his gills, his heritage. The word quirkless was a heavy enough shield, a simpler truth than the complicated, monstrous one he hid. All Might, now just Toshinori Yagi, looked at the boy. He saw the desperation, the raw, unyielding hope in his eyes. He remembered the feel of that strange, heavy strength in the underpass. He remembered the almost invisible marks on his neck. His planned speech, the gentle but firm one he gave to all starry-eyed dreamers, died on his lips. This was a different situation. "Kid," Toshinori began, his voice raspy. He sighed, a weary, rattling sound. "I saw what happened back there. Before I even arrived. You fought back. You stunned that villain, even for a moment. That strength, it's not a quirk, is it?" Izuku flinched as if struck. His hand flew to his scarf, pulling it tighter. "How did you?" "I'm the symbol of peace, not the symbol of ignorance," Toshinori said, a flicker of the old All Might in his weary eyes. "I've seen every kind of power this world has to offer. Yours feels different. It feels biological. Innate. The heroes who first classified these things 100 years ago drew a line in the sand, quirk on one side, mutation or anomaly on the other. It was arbitrary, but it stuck." He leaned against the railing, the wind whipping his oversized t-shirt. "So, to answer your question, can you be a hero? With the power and the heart you have?" The answer is yes. You could be a hero, a very effective one. Hope, brilliant and blinding, surged through Izuku's chest. It was the first time anyone, had said that to him. But Toshinori's voice grew heavy, and the hope in Izuku's chest turned to ice. "The world won't make it easy for you. It's not about what you can do, kid. It's about what they will let you do." He gestured out at the city sprawling below them. "Look out there. This is a world built on the idea of quirks. Quirks are flashy. They're understandable. They're marketable. A boy who can create explosions from his hands? He's a hero. A girl who can manipulate gravity? She's a hero. But a boy who is just strong, A boy with gills and the blood of something else? They won't call you a hero. They'll call you a monster. A brute. A villain. The words were a physical blow, each one landing with the force of a punch. They were the echoes of Dr. Tsubasa, of his classmates, of Bakugo. Pro-heroism is a profession of public perception, Toshinori continued, his gaze distant. You have to be a symbol. People need to look at you and feel safe, feel inspired. They can't do that if they're afraid of you. If they see you as an other. It's not fair. It's not right. But it is the reality of the world we live in. You would face a tide of prejudice and fear that would drown you long before any villain got the chance. Izuku's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, the rough concrete scraping his skin. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. It was true. It was all true. He was a monster trying to play hero. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Toshinori standing there, his gaunt face set with a strange, new determination. I told you the reality of the world, the man said, his voice quiet but firm. Now I'm going to tell you how we can change it. You have the heart of a true hero. I saw it when you, a boy I had just lectured on the dangers of hero work, rushed in to save someone while the pros stood by and did nothing. Your body moved before you could think. That is the mark of a hero. He held out a bony hand. Your innate power is a wall between you and your dream. What you need is a bridge. A way to cross the gap between what you are and what society will accept. You need a power they can understand. A legacy they already revere. You need a quirk. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to comprehend. But you said I'm quirkless. A grin, wide and familiar, spread across Toshinori's face. Steam began to hiss from his body, and with a great effort, he expanded back into the colossal form of All Might. I wasn't finished, he boomed, pointing a triumphant finger at Izuku. My quirk is not something I was born with. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. He struck a heroic pose, his fist against his chest. It is a power that can be inherited. And its name is... One for all. Izuku's mind short-circuited. A transferable quirk? A power passed down? It sounded like something out of a comic book. This power represents the crystallized strength of all who have wielded it. All Might explained, his voice ringing with passion. A power to fight evil. And I have been searching for a worthy successor. When I saw you, a young man who is judged for his biology, rush into danger to save another, I knew you were the one. He leaned down, his bright blue eyes, now burning with intensity, locking onto Izuku's. Young man, your circumstances have made you an outcast. Your strength is seen as monstrous. But with One for All, you will have a quirk. A phenomenal, undeniable quirk. It will be the bridge. It will be the symbol that allows the world to see the hero you already are. It will not be easy. You will have to work harder than anyone. But it is your chance. He held out his hand, now massive and powerful. So, I ask you again, young Midoriya? But this time, it's not a question of what the world will allow. It's a question of what you will choose. Do you want to be a hero? The world, which had been a sea of gray impossibilities, suddenly exploded into color. All Might wasn't just offering him a power. He was offering him acceptance. A name. A place. He was offering him a way to turn the very thing that made him a monster into the foundation of a hero. Tears still flowed, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of catharsis, of overwhelming, earth-shattering hope. The boy from a different sea, the boy who hid his true self beneath a scarf, looked up at the symbol of peace. Through his sobs, he managed to choke out the only word that mattered. Yes. The sun was a hesitant smear of orange and pink on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the mountains of refuse. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less a park and more a testament to decades of societal neglect. It was a coastline choked with the skeletons of washing machines, the tangled entrails of fishing nets, and the rusted hulls of abandoned appliances. The air, thick with the briny scent of the sea, was tainted by an undercurrent of decay and rust. To any normal person, it was a junkyard. An eyesore. To Izuku Midoriya, it was the most beautiful place on earth. He stood beside the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi, the cool morning air a balm against his skin. His scarf was tucked into his backpack. For the first time in what felt like forever, his gills were exposed to the open air, and the salt-heavy breeze felt like life itself. Here, on the edge of the vast, churning ocean, he didn't feel like a monster. He felt at home. "This is it, my boy," Toshinori said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He gestured with a sweeping, bony arm at the disaster zone. "This place was once beautiful, but it has fallen into disrepair, much like the public's perception of heroism, clogged with the debris of commercialism and apathy." He coughed, a racking sound that shook his frail frame. "Poetic, isn't it?" Izuku just stared, his green eyes wide with a mixture of awe and determination. "This is where I'll train. This is where you will be forged," Toshinori declared, a flicker of All Might's grandeur igniting in his sunken eyes. "The UA entrance exam is in 10 months. Your body, while incredibly robust for what you are, is still an unprepared vessel for the tempest that is one for all. Pouring that power into you now would be like trying to fill a shot glass from a fire hose. You'd burst." He produced a sheaf of papers, meticulously printed and stapled. "Behold. My custom-made American Dream Plan. It's a comprehensive workout regimen, diet plan, and sleep schedule designed to turn your body into a fortress capable of containing my power." Izuku took the papers with reverent hands. They were covered in All Might's surprisingly neat handwriting, with little cartoon sketches of himself in the margins giving encouraging thumbs-ups. The workouts were grueling, the diet strict. It was an impossible schedule. Izuku's heart hammered with excitement. "Your goal," Toshinori said, pointing to a far section of the beach where a particularly large, decrepit refrigerator sat half buried in the sand, "is to clear this entire section of the beach. Every last scrap. You will haul, lift, and move this junk, strengthening every muscle in your body. You will make this shore clean again, and in doing so, you will build a worthy vessel." "Yes, sir," Izuku said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Good. Now let's start with that fridge over there." Toshinori pointed. "It's a good baseline. See if you can even budge it." Izuku nodded, his determination solidifying. He approached the refrigerator. It was an old, heavy model, its enamel paint peeling to reveal angry patches of rust. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He bent his knees, getting a firm grip on the bottom edge. He remembered the feeling of raw strength he'd used against the sludge villain, that deep, primal wellspring of power that was his alone. He wasn't using one for all. This was just him. He pulled. The refrigerator didn't budge. It groaned, a horrible screech of metal on sand, and then lifted clean out of the ground. Sand and rusted metal rained down as Izuku, with a grunt of effort, hoisted the entire appliance onto his shoulder. He staggered for a moment under the immense weight, his sneakers sinking into the wet sand, but he held it. Toshinori's jaw dropped. He stared, his skeletal face a mask of disbelief. He had expected the boy to struggle, to maybe drag it a few inches. He hadn't expected him to deadlift it. "Holy smokes!" he muttered, forgetting his all-might persona entirely. Izuku, panting, carried the fridge over to the large dumpster the city had provided for the cleanup effort. He tipped it over the side, and it crashed inside with a deafening clang. He turned back to his mentor, his face flushed with exertion and pride. "How was that, All Might?" Toshinori composed himself, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Excellent, my boy. Truly magnificent. Your base specifications are even higher than I anticipated. This is wonderful. It means we can push your training even harder." And so it began. The 10 months that followed were a blur of sweat, pain, and rust. Every day before school and every hour after, Izuku was at Dagoba Beach. He became a creature of the tides, his internal clock synced to the rising and falling of the sun. His fishman physiology gave him an astounding advantage. His dense muscles and powerful bone structure allowed him to lift weights that would have crushed a normal person. The constant proximity to the sea invigorated him, mitigating the exhaustion that should have overwhelmed him. He was in his element. He dragged tangled masses of steel rebar, hauled waterlogged tires by the dozen, and even managed to single-handedly pull a small, rusted-out car from the surf. His body changed. The soft lines of a boyish frame hardened into the lean, powerful physique of an athlete. Scars from sharp metal crisscrossed his arms, but beneath them, his muscles were like coiled steel cables. All Might watched, a constant presence of encouragement and guidance. He timed Izuku's runs, corrected his lifting form, and quizzed him on hero ethics during water breaks. He saw the boy's unbreakable spirit, the relentless drive that burned brighter than any quirk. Finally, the morning of the UA exam arrived. 10 months of brutal, back-breaking labor had culminated in this single moment. Izuku stood atop the now pristine mountain of compacted trash, screaming his triumph at the rising sun as All Might filmed him on his phone. The beach was clean. Not a single scrap of junk remained. The sand was golden, the water clear, and the shore was finally free. Izuku slid down the pile of scrap, landing gracefully on the sand. He looked at his mentor, his eyes shining. Toshinori smiled, reverting to his skeletal form. He held up the phone, showing Izuku the picture he'd taken before the sun had fully risen. It was of Izuku, a tear-streaked but triumphant silhouette against the dawn. "Excellent work, my boy," Toshinori said, his voice thick with pride. "Truly excellent. You've gone above and beyond. You've created a magnificent vessel." He then did something that made Izuku's blood run cold. He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "Now," he said, holding it up. "For your reward." Izuku stared at the hair. "Huh! You have to ingest my DNA to inherit my power," Toshinori explained, his face completely serious. "This is how it works." He held the hair out, his expression unwavering. "Eat this." Izuku's mind reeled. All the epic, heroic imagery he had built up around the sacred torch of One for All, the passing of a divine flame, a solemn ceremony, shattered and was replaced by this. He had to eat a hair. Still, this was his dream. Swallowing his revulsion and his pride, he took the strand of hair and, with a grimace, forced it down. The feeling was indescribable. For a few hours, nothing happened. Izuku took his written exam, his mind buzzing, half expecting to suddenly explode with power in the middle of a question about hero law. But there was only a strange, faint thrumming deep within him, like a power line humming in the distance. It wasn't until he was standing before the massive gates of the practical exam grounds, surrounded by other hopefuls, that he truly felt it. The thrumming grew louder, resonating with the very water in his cells. It felt less like a new power being added and more like a massive dam had been placed in the river of his own innate strength, the pressure building to an incredible, terrifying degree. He needed to test it. He needed to control it. All Might's frantic, last-minute advice echoed in his head: clench your buttocks and scream smash from the bottom of your heart. It wasn't exactly the most refined instruction. The gates opened, and everyone sprinted in. Izuku was left in the dust for a moment before he shook himself out of his stupor and ran. The goal was to score points by disabling robots. He saw a one-pointer, a relatively small but agile machine, bearing down on another examinee. "This is it. My first step to being a hero," he focused, trying to draw on that immense, pressurized feeling. He channeled it into his arm, remembering the 10 months of training, the weight of the refrigerators, the pull of the car. He pulled his fist back. One for all. 100%. He felt a surge of power so immense it defied comprehension. It wasn't just strength. It was a cataclysm. But something was wrong. It wasn't flowing through him. It was expanding within him. He threw the punch. The robot was obliterated. A concussive blast of wind erupted from his fist, tearing a trench in the asphalt and shattering the windows of the surrounding buildings. But the force that went forward was nothing compared to the force that recoiled into his own body. It wasn't a clean break. Pain, absolute and all-consuming, erupted through him. It felt like every cell in his arm had been subjected to the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench, and then instantly brought to the surface. It was the bends on a catastrophic, cellular level. The water within his very being felt like it was boiling and freezing simultaneously. A deep, agonizing pressure built behind his eyes, in his joints, and most terrifyingly, in his gills. He looked down at his arm. It was a ruin of purple and black, bent at an impossible angle. But worse, he could feel a trickle of warmth on his neck. He reached up with his good hand. His fingers came away stained with blood. His gills were bleeding, torn from the inside out by the sheer hydrostatic shock of One for All's activation. The pain was so intense it almost made him pass out. But through the haze, he could see the other examinees racking up points. He had 0. He was crippled, bleeding, and failing. No. I won't let it end here. He scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming. He ran, his useless arm flopping at his side, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He had to do something. He had to get just 1 point, and then the ground began to shake. The 0-pointer emerged from behind a skyscraper, a Goliath of chrome and steel that dwarfed the cityscape. It was an obstacle, not a target. Everyone ran. Everyone except Izuku. He saw what they didn't, a girl with brown hair, trapped under a pile of rubble directly in the robot's path. His body moved before he could think. Ignoring the screaming agony in his arm, he pushed off with his legs. He channeled One for All again, this time into his lower body. The same crushing, boiling pressure filled his legs, but he didn't care. He launched himself into the air, a green blur soaring towards the robot's face. She's in danger. I have to save her. He drew back his ruined fist. There was nothing left to break. He poured every ounce of his will, every bit of the power he could summon, into that one final strike. Smayas! The impact was apocalyptic. His fist caved in the robot's head, the metal screaming as it crumpled. A shockwave, even larger than the first, rippled through the colossal machine. It shuddered, its single red eye flickering out, and then it began to fall backward, away from the girl. Izuku was a ragdoll in the sky, his other arm and both legs now shattered by the same internal pressure. As he plummeted towards the ground, he saw the girl, safe, and allowed himself a small, pained smile. He had saved her. He had 0 points, but he had acted like a hero. He woke up in a sterile white room, the smell of antiseptic sharp in his nostrils. An old woman with a kind smile, the youthful heroine, recovery girl, was by his bedside. She explained that she had healed his broken bones, but it had taken almost all of his stamina. The damage, she noted, was peculiar, not just fractures, but severe, deep tissue bruising and internal hemorrhaging unlike anything she'd ever seen from a strength quirk. She also mentioned, with a clinical but gentle tone, the unusual lacerations on his neck. Those gills of yours were bleeding quite profusely, young man, she said, her eyes sharp. The internal pressure from your quirk seems to affect your entire vascular system. You'll need to be extremely careful. Your body is not acclimated to this power at all. He was sent home, exhausted and aching, a week of uncertainty stretching before him as he waited for the results. He spent most of it submerged in the bathtub. The water was the only thing that seemed to soothe the deep, phantom ache in his bones and calm the stinging in his gills. The feeling of being completely enveloped in water was like a healing balm, easing a tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. His mother, Inko, was a wreck. She fluttered around him, offering food, blankets, and a constant stream of worried words. Seeing the blood on his neck that first day had terrified her in a way she hadn't felt for years. It brought back painful memories, shadows of a past she had worked so hard to bury. Oh, Izuku, she'd wept, dabbing his neck with a damp cloth after he'd emerged from the bath, pruned and pale. This power, it's tearing you apart. It's just like your father, always pushing himself too far, always coming home broken. She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with a panic that had nothing to do with Izuku's immediate injuries. Izuku, still weak, looked at her. My father? You never talk about him. Inko's face crumpled. He worked overseas, Izuku. It was a dangerous job. That's all. She bustled away, changing the subject, but the seed was planted. A new mystery had taken root in Izuku's mind. The Yui acceptance letter arrived a week later. It was a projection of All Might, explaining that Izuku had passed not just with 0 villain points, but with 60 rescue points, a score awarded for his heroic, selfless act of saving the girl. He had been accepted into the hero course. Izuku wept with joy, the tears flowing freely for the first time since that day on the rooftop. His dream, his impossible dream, was real, but as the initial euphoria faded, a cold reality set in. He had a quirk he couldn't control without destroying himself. His drawback was unique, horrifying, and intrinsically linked to the very biology he had spent his life hiding. How could he be a hero if every punch was a suicide mission? Driven by a new resolve, he decided to clean his room. It was a symbolic act. He was no longer the boy who just collected hero merchandise. He was a boy who was going to be a hero. He needed a fresh start. He pulled down his All Might posters, dusted his shelves, and began clearing out the closet, a space that had become a black hole of old-school projects and forgotten junk. In the very back, tucked under a stack of old blankets, was a heavy, wooden box. It was strange. He had never seen it before. It was made of a dark, dense wood that seemed resistant to moisture, its surface cool to the touch. There was no lock, just a simple, fitted lid. It felt ancient. He pried it open. The air that escaped smelled of salt, ozone, and something else, something old and powerful, like the deep ocean itself. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were several scrolls of a strange, waterproof paper, almost like vellum made from kelp. They were tied with simple twine. His heart pounded as he untied the first one. The writing was in a strong, elegant script he didn't recognize. But beside the characters were incredibly detailed anatomical drawings and diagrams of figures and powerful martial arts stances. The drawings depicted men and women who looked like him, powerful humanoids with gills, webbed hands, and the fierce eyes of predators of the deep. They were fishmen. He unrolled another scroll. This one had more diagrams, showing how a punch could manipulate the water around it, creating shockwaves. Another showed how a practitioner could send a kinetic ripple through the water in an opponent's body, striking them from the inside out. It was a martial art of impossible power and grace, designed specifically for his kind of body. At the bottom of the last scroll, there was a message, written in the same neat hand, but this time in standard Japanese. It was a letter. To my son Izuku, if you are reading this, it means you have grown strong enough to find it, and I am not there to teach you myself. For that, I am eternally sorry. The world of the surface is not always kind to those who hail from the sea. I had to leave to protect you and your mother, but not a day has passed that I have not thought of you. What you have found is your birthright. It is the legacy of our people. It is fishman karate, the strongest of all underwater martial arts. It teaches that water is everywhere, in the sea, in the air, even in the bodies of our enemies. A master of this art can control that water, turning a single droplet into a deadly weapon or a mighty tide into an extension of their own will. Your body is a gift. Your strength is not a curse. It is an inheritance. This art will teach you to control it, to focus it, to understand the current that flows within you. It will not be easy, but it is your path. Learn it. Master it. And show the world the true power of a man who carries the heart of the ocean. It wasn't signed. Izuku sank to the floor, the scrolls clutched in his hands. Tears streamed down his face, dripping onto the waterproof paper, where they beaded up like tiny jewels. This whole time, he had thought his strength was a random, monstrous anomaly. But it wasn't. It was an inheritance, a legacy from a father he never knew, a man who had faced the same prejudice, and had left him the tools to overcome it. He had two inheritances now. One for all, the quirk of a hero, a blazing sun he could barely touch without being burned, and fishman karate, the art of his people, a deep, powerful ocean current that was already a part of him. Maybe one could help him control the other. The next morning, long before the sun had risen, Izuku was back at Dagoba Beach. The waves crashed against the shore in a steady, rhythmic pulse. He stood at the water's edge, the cool foam washing over his bare feet. He unrolled the first scroll, studying the first basic stance, feet wide, knees bent, hands held open as if feeling the flow of water itself. He mimicked the pose. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, not just of air, but of the moisture within it. He focused, not on the raging inferno of One for All, but on the calm, steady power in his own muscles. He tried to feel the water around him, the pull of the tide, the immense weight of the ocean at his back. For a fleeting moment, he felt it. A connection. A sense of a vast, untapped power that didn't threaten to break him, but promised to flow through him. A familiar voice cut through the sound of the waves. Starting your training early, my boy. Izuku opened his eyes. All Might, in his Toshinori form, stood a few yards away, a thermos of coffee in his hand. He was looking at the scroll in Izuku's hand, his expression unreadable. "What's this?" he asked, walking closer. Izuku hesitated for only a second before handing him the letter. "It's from my father." Tashinori read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each sentence. He looked from the letter to Izuku, who was now holding the martial arts stance with a new, quiet confidence. He saw the way the boy's muscles were aligned, the focus in his eyes. He saw the intersection of two incredible legacies beginning to form in this one young man. "Fishman karate." Tashinori breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This changes things. This might be the key. Your body already understands the flow of water. Perhaps this is the language it needs to understand the flow of one for all." He looked at Izuku, his eyes filled with a new level of respect and hope. "Your journey just became much more complicated, my boy. And much more interesting." Izuku looked out at the endless ocean, then back at the scrolls, and finally, at the hero who had given him a chance. He had a quirk to master and a birthright to claim. The current of his life was changing, pulling him towards a future that was both terrifying and magnificent. And for the first time, he felt ready to swim with the tide. The morning of the UA High entrance exam dawned cold and clear. Izuku stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom, a stranger staring back at him. The boy in the reflection was taller, his shoulders broader, the soft lines of his face replaced by a sharper jaw and a quiet intensity in his eyes. 10 months of hauling scrap metal under the relentless sun had stripped him of his boyhood fragility, leaving behind a physique of dense, functional muscle. He was strong. He knew he was, but as he looked at his own reflection, all he could feel was a deep, thrumming anxiety that resonated in his very bones. He was dressed in a brand new tracksuit, a custom order his mother had insisted on. It was a deep forest green, made of a durable, slightly elastic material. But its most important feature was the collar. It was high and stiff, zipping up to just under his chin, forming a rigid barrier between the world and the secret etched into his neck. The long sleeves and fitted cuffs felt less like sportswear, and more like a carefully constructed disguise. He tugged at the collar, a familiar, nervous habit. It felt tight, restrictive, suffocating. "Izuku, are you ready?" Inko's voice was soft from the hallway. "Almost," he called back, his own voice sounding thin and reedy to his ears. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in his chest. Today was the culmination of everything. 10 months of brutal training with all might. A lifetime of dreaming, and now 2 new, terrifying powers waged a silent war within him. One for all was a contained supernova, a blazing sun of inherited power that hummed just beneath his skin, promising untold strength at the cost of his own destruction. The other, fishman karate, was a deep, cold water current, a whisper of an ancient art he had only just begun to decipher from his father's scrolls. It felt natural, an extension of the strength that was his birthright, but it was untested, its true potential a mystery. His plan was simple, born of late-night muttering sessions and a healthy dose of sheer terror. Do not use one for all. Under no circumstances was he to touch that cataclysmic power. He would rely solely on his base fishman's strength, and the rudimentary principles of fishman karate he had practiced at the water's edge. It would be enough. It had to be. He couldn't afford to arrive at his dream school only to detonate on the first day. His mother stood at the door, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her eyes, the same vibrant green as his, were filled with a potent mixture of pride and bone-deep terror. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she made a final adjustment to his collar, ensuring it was perfectly straight, perfectly concealing. It was a small, maternal gesture, but it felt heavy with unspoken history. It was the same gesture she had been making since he was 4 years old, a silent conspiracy to hide their family's secret from the world. "Be careful, Izuku," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Just do your best. And please, please be careful." "I will, Mom," he promised, giving her a smile that felt brittle and thin. "I'll be okay." As he walked toward the towering gates of UA High, he felt like a spy infiltrating a foreign country. He was surrounded by a sea of teenagers, all buzzing with nervous energy, all proudly, and in some cases, loudly, displaying the physical markers of their quirks. A boy with engine-like exhausts protruding from his calves stretched nearby. A girl with pink skin and small horns laughed with her friends. Their powers were part of their identity, woven into their very being and celebrated by society. Izuku just pulled his collar higher and tried to make himself smaller, a futile effort for someone with his newly broadened shoulders. He felt like an imposter, a monster hiding in a hero's costume. The freckles on his cheeks, which he now knew were faint echoes of a whale shark's spots, suddenly felt like a giant, flashing sign advertising his otherness. "Get out of my way, Deku." The voice was a low, familiar snarl. Izuku froze, a Pavlovian chill running down his spine. Katsuki Bakugo shouldered past him, not even bothering to give him a full glance. His crimson eyes scanned the crowd with blistering contempt, dismissing every other applicant as a mere obstacle. But then he paused, his gaze snagging on Izuku. He did a slow, deliberate head-to-toe scan, taking in the new physique, the rigid posture, the way Izuku refused to meet his eyes. A flicker of something, confusion, irritation, crossed his face. "So, the fish freak actually showed up," Bakugo sneered, his voice dripping with acid. "Still hiding that ugly mug under a scarf? Or did you finally grow a spine?" He didn't wait for an answer, just scoffed and stalked toward the entrance. "Doesn't matter. You're just a pebble on the road. A weird, slimy pebble. Don't even think about getting in my way." Izuku's fists clenched at his sides. The old insult, Deku, felt almost nostalgic compared to the sharp, targeted cruelty of Fish Freak. He watched Bakugo disappear into the crowd, the familiar sting of shame mixing with a new, simmering anger. He wasn't just a pebble. He wasn't. He took a determined step forward and promptly caught his foot on an uneven paving stone, pitching forward in a clumsy, mortifying trip. He braced for the painful impact with the ground, his life flashing before his eyes in a montage of embarrassing moments. But the impact never came. He was floating, a few inches from the concrete, his limbs dangling uselessly. "Whoa, are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. A girl with a round face, rosy cheeks, and a permanent brown bob stood over him, one hand outstretched. She touched her fingertips together. "Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking. It's just, it would be a bad omen to fall right before the exam, right?" She helped him to his feet, and the floating sensation vanished. He was suddenly aware of his own weight again, a solid, grounding feeling that was deeply familiar. Her quirk, it felt so strange, so alien to his dense, heavy body. Thank you," he stammered, his face burning a brighter red than Bakugo's eyes. You saved me. It's no problem," she chirped, giving him a sunny smile. "Well, good luck in there. Let's both do our best." She hurried off, leaving Izuku standing there, his heart hammering for an entirely different reason. Someone had been nice to him. A complete stranger had shown him kindness without a hint of judgment. It was a small thing, but it felt like a life raft in his ocean of anxiety. Maybe this place wouldn't be so bad after all. The written exam was a breeze. Izuku's analytical mind, honed by years of meticulous hero analysis, tore through the questions. But the whole time, the low hum of One for All was a constant, distracting presence. It felt like a beast pacing in a cage deep inside him, waiting to be unleashed. Then came the practical exam briefing. The voice hero, Present Mike, was a whirlwind of energy on the stage, his booming voice echoing through the massive auditorium. "Welcome, one and all, to today's live performance," he screamed, striking a pose. "Everybody say hey." Silence. Izuku sank lower in his seat, muttering to himself, his mind already racing. 3 types of robots, varying point values, a wide-open cityscape, a focus on disabling, not destroying. So, precision is key. Brute force might cause too much collateral damage, which could lead to point deductions. My base strength is high, so a direct punch is viable, but a fishman karate strike could be more efficient, targeting internal mechanisms with a shockwave. I need to manage my stamina. Dehydration is a risk in an open arena. Must locate water sources, maybe fire hydrants. And you, with the messy green hair. Izuku snapped out of his trance. A tall, well-built young man with glasses was standing and pointing directly at him, his arm ramrod straight. "You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and unbecoming for a potential UE student. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave," Izuku squeaked, covering his mouth in embarrassment. Sorry." The boy then turned his attention to present mic. "And on the subject of seriousness, sir, the handout clearly lists 4 types of villains, not 3. If this is a misprint on official UA documentation, it is a shameful error for Japan's top hero academy. And a great disservice to us all." Present Mike grinned. "Excellent question, examinee 7111. The 4th villain type is the 0-pointer. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as a gimmick, a stage hazard. Your best bet is to just avoid it." The boy in glasses bowed stiffly and sat down. Izuku wished the floor would swallow him whole. His first 2 interactions with his potential classmates, getting yelled at and getting saved from falling on his face. Not exactly a heroic start. They were herded onto buses and taken to vast, separate mock cityscapes. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B, standing before a pair of colossal gates. The girl who had saved him was there, looking just as nervous as he felt. He wanted to go over and thank her properly, maybe wish her luck, but his feet felt bolted to the ground. The sheer scale of the moment was paralyzing. "And start." Present Mic's voice blared from hidden speakers. Izuku looked around, confused. Everyone else was already gone, sprinting into the city. "What's the matter?" the voice boomed. "There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! The die is cast." Panic surged through him. He was already behind. He bolted through the gates, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cityscape was a maze of skyscrapers and empty streets. The air was filled with the sounds of explosions, crashes, and the screech of tortured metal. Other examinees were already scoring points. A boy with a sparkling naval laser took down a 1-pointer. A student with spiky red hair hardened his fists and smashed another. Izuku skidded to a halt as a 1-pointer, a sleek, scorpion-like machine, burst through a wall and charged at him. "Okay. Plan A. No one for all." He planted his feet, dropping into the basic stance from his father's scrolls. He took a deep, steadying breath, trying to feel the moisture in the air, the cold current of his own inner strength. The robot lunged, its metallic claws slashing. Izuku sidestepped, the claws scraping harmlessly against the asphalt where he'd been standing. He saw his opening. He channeled his raw, innate strength into his fist, but he didn't just throw a wild punch. He focused it, visualizing the diagrams from the scroll, the transfer of kinetic energy, the precise point of impact. It was the first time he'd ever used this in a real fight. "Hyakamigawara Seiken," he whispered, the name of the technique feeling foreign and powerful on his tongue. 100-tile true punch. His fist connected with the robot's torso. The sound wasn't the sharp crack of a normal punch. It was a deep, dull thump, like a wrecking ball hitting packed earth. There was no flash, no explosion, but the robot's metal chassis visibly buckled inward, a concave crater appearing where he had struck. It shuddered, its single red eye flickering, and then collapsed into a heap of twitching, sparking metal. Izuku stared at his fist, then at the disabled robot. It worked. It had actually worked. A grin, genuine and fierce, split his face. The fear receded, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He could do this. He took off running, his eyes scanning for targets. He was not as flashy as the others. He couldn't fly or shoot lasers. But he was a force of nature. He moved with a brutal efficiency. A 2-pointer ambushed him from an alley. He ripped a fire hydrant from its moorings and used the high-pressure jet of water to stun it before delivering another crushing, concussive blow. The water felt good, invigorating his skin and clearing his head. He noticed the punch felt heavier, more impactful, when the target was wet. He filed the information away. He racked up points steadily, 2 points here, 3 points there. He was methodical, precise. He avoided the chaotic brawls where multiple examinees fought over a single robot, instead seeking out isolated targets. He was a shark, systematically hunting his prey. He had 45 points, a respectable score, but he knew it might not be enough. The hum of One for All was a constant siren song in the back of his mind. Just a little, a 5% flick, you could take down that whole group over there. He gritted his teeth and pushed the thought away. He would not break. Not here. Not now. And then the world began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing louder and louder. The ground shook so violently that Izuku had to brace himself against a wall to stay upright. The other examinees stopped fighting, their faces paling with fear. From behind a skyscraper at the far end of the street, it rose. The zero-pointer. It was a titan, a god of steel and circuits. It was so tall that its head disappeared behind the tops of the tallest buildings, its massive form casting a shadow that swallowed the entire battle center. Its single red eye glowed with malevolent light, and its arms, each the size of a bus, swiped through the air, punching clean through concrete and steel as if they were cardboard. This was not a villain. This was a force of nature. An event. The collective response of the examinees was instantaneous and universal, pure, unadulterated terror. Run away! It's the zero-pointer! Don't engage! Everyone turned and fled, a stampede of panicked teenagers desperate to escape the path of the mechanical behemoth. Izuku, caught up in the tide of fear, ran with them. Avoid it, President Mike had said. It was the only logical thing to do. Then he heard it. A small, pained cry from behind him, nearly lost in the cacophony of destruction. He skidded to a halt, turning back against the tide of fleeing students. His blood ran cold. It was her. The kind girl with the gravity quirk. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete, a casualty of the zero-pointer's rampage. She was trying desperately to push it off, but it was too heavy. And the giant robot was lumbering directly towards her, its massive foot raised to crush everything in its path. The pros at the observation deck would intervene, surely. They had to. But what if they were a second too late? In that moment, Izuku Midoriya's carefully constructed plan, his 10 months of training, and his fear of One for all evaporated like mist in the sun. His mind went utterly blank. All that remained was a single, primal instinct that screamed louder than the grinding gears of the robot, louder than the panicked shouts of the other students. A hero saves people. His legs exploded with motion. He was sprinting back towards the danger, back towards the titan that everyone else was running from. Bakugo, who was also running, saw the green blur streak past him in the opposite direction, and his eyes widened in disbelief. What is that idiot doing? Izuku's mind caught up to his body. He couldn't lift the rebel in time. He couldn't get to her on foot. There was only one option. He had to stop the robot. Now, he planted his feet, pouring every ounce of will he possessed into his legs. He reached for the supernova inside him. Not all of it. He couldn't survive that. Just a sliver. A fraction. He remembered All Might's frantic advice. Clench your buttocks! It was absurd, but it was all he had. One for all. 8%. Green lightning, crackling with untamed power, engulfed his legs. The pressure was immense, a crushing, agonizing force that felt like it was trying to atomize his bones. With a scream that was equal parts pain and effort, he launched himself off the ground. He didn't just jump. He erupted. The asphalt beneath his feet shattered, and he shot into the air like a cannonball, a green comet arcing directly towards the zero-pointer's monstrous face. The wind screamed past him. Below, he could see the girl's terrified, upturned face. This is it. Both of them. My two inheritances. Together, he drew back his right arm, the one he hadn't broken before. The green lightning of One for All swirled around it, a maelstrom of raw power. But he added something else. He reached for the other current inside him, the one that tasted of salt and the deep ocean. He remembered the scrolls, the diagram of a punch manipulating the water and the air itself. He focused, pulling on the ambient moisture, the humidity, the trace amounts of vapor in the atmosphere. He visualized it coalescing around his fist, an invisible, high-pressure gauntlet of pure water. The air in front of his knuckles began to shimmer, distorting like a heat haze. He was level with the robot's head now. Its single red eye locked onto him. He poured every dream, every ounce of his heroic spirit, into this one, single attack. It was a 5% Delaware smash, amplified by the core principle of his birthright. Smayawash. The moment of impact was a symphony of destruction. It wasn't a clean punch that merely dented metal. The one for all energy provided the catastrophic kinetic force, while the focused water pressure from his fishman karate technique acted as a hydraulic spearhead. The combination of the two forces created a unique phenomenon. Instead of just cracking, the robot's faceplate imploded. The sound was not a high-pitched clang but a deep, resonant, underwater boom that shook the very air. A visible shockwave of compressed air and vaporized water erupted from the point of impact, rippling outwards in a perfect, shimmering circle. The shockwave traveled through the robot's chassis, not like a hammer blow, but like a seismic event. Internal wiring fried. Hydraulic lines burst. Structural supports warped and shattered. The Titan's red eye flickered and died. It shuddered, its massive body groaning under the strain of its own weight, and then it began to topple backward, away from the trapped girl, crashing into a skyscraper with a deafening roar of protesting metal. In the sky, Izuku was a broken doll. The recoil had been devastating. His right arm was shattered, a mangled ruin of purple flesh and protruding bone. Both of his legs, from the jump, were just as bad. The internal pressure had ruptured capillaries all over his body, and he could feel the familiar, horrifying trickle of blood from his gills. He was falling, spinning uselessly through the air. He saw the girl, safe, looking up at him with eyes wide with awe and terror. He had done it. He had saved her. He had 0 villain points, but in that moment, he didn't care. It was worth it. He closed his eyes, bracing for the final, fatal impact. A sharp slap to his cheek brought him back to reality. He was floating again, the same weightless feeling as before. He looked over and saw the girl, her face pale and strained, one hand held out towards him. She had pushed the rubble off herself, and used her quirk to save him. "Release!" she gasped, and as he gently floated to the ground, she pressed her hands to her mouth and threw up from the overuse of her power. "Time's up!" Present Mick's voice echoed through the now silent battlefield. Izuku lay on the broken asphalt, a broken boy in a broken city. Other students began to emerge from their hiding places, staring at him, then at the fallen Goliath he had single-handedly defeated. They weren't looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with confusion, with fear, with a hint of suspicion. They had seen the raw power, the inhuman leap, the strange, concussive force of his punch. They didn't know what he was, and it scared them. An old woman in a hero costume, recovery girl, made her way through the crowd, her lips pursed in a disapproving line. "Oh my goodness," she clucked, looking at Izuku's mangled limbs. "You've really done a number on yourself, haven't you, dearie?" She leaned in and gave him a soft kiss on the forehead. He felt a strange, draining sensation as his bones began to twist and knit themselves back together with unnatural speed. As the paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, he felt a profound exhaustion wash over him. He had no idea if he had passed. He had no villain points to his name, but as he was wheeled away, past the awestruck faces of his fellow examinees and the monumental wreckage of the zero-pointer, one thought burned clear in his mind. He had acted like a hero. He had combined the blazing sun of his borrowed power with the deep ocean current of his inheritance. It was a violent, self-destructive baptism, but he had come out the other side. He was Izuku Midoriya, and his first step into the world of heroes was complete. The UA high school uniform felt like a trap. It was a crisp, stylish gray blazer over a white button-down shirt and a dark green tie. It was a symbol of prestige, a declaration to the world that its wearer was among the elite, the chosen few destined for greatness. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a source of profound and suffocating anxiety. The collar of the shirt was soft and standard, offering none of the concealing rigidity of his custom tracksuit. It left the sides of his neck distressingly exposed. He had spent 20 minutes that morning in front of the mirror, trying to arrange the collar just so, attempting to pull it higher, to somehow make the fabric hide the 3 faint, parallel slits on either side of his throat. But it was useless. They were there, a subtle but undeniable mark of his otherness. Anyone who looked closely enough would see. He walked through the hallowed halls of UA, his shoulders hunched, his head tilted slightly downward. He felt a phantom itch on his neck, The same sensation he got when the air was too dry, or when he was under intense scrutiny. He was a fish out of water in the most literal sense, and this new, magnificent pond was filled with predators and observers. Finding Class 1A was easy. Finding the courage to open its ridiculously oversized door was another matter entirely. He took a deep, steadying breath, the air feeling thin and inadequate in his lungs, and slid the door open. The classroom was already buzzing with a low hum of chatter. He saw a few familiar faces from the entrance exam. The spiky red-haired boy who seemed perpetually enthusiastic was talking to a boy with blonde hair and a black lightning bolt in it. In the back, a boy with a bird-like head sat silently, shrouded in shadow. And then he saw them. The tall, serious boy with glasses who had publicly reprimanded him during the briefing was already seated, his posture ramrod straight. And in the front row, his feet propped up on the desk in a blatant display of arrogance, was Katsuki Bakugo. His crimson eyes flickered towards the door, and for a fraction of a second, they locked with Izuku's. The look on Bakugo's face was a complex, venomous cocktail of rage, confusion, and utter disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how Izuku, the fish freak, the quirkless, worthless Deku, was standing here, in this classroom, wearing this uniform. He just scoffed and turned away, as if the mere sight of Izuku was an insult to his senses. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was his new reality. A classroom of prodigies, a childhood tormentor, and a secret that felt like it was tattooed on his skin. He shuffled towards an empty desk near the back, hoping to melt into the background. "Ah, you're here!" Izuku flinched. The boy with the glasses was marching towards him, his hand chopping the air with sharp, precise movements. "Good morning. I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy," he announced, his voice a formal baritone. "Oh, I'm Midoriya," Izuku stammered, bowing awkwardly. "It's nice to meet you, Ida." "Midoriya!" Ida's eyes widened behind his spectacles. "I must apologize for my boorish behavior at the exam orientation. You correctly deduced the true nature of the practical exam, that there was a hidden component beyond simply accumulating villain points. I, on the other hand, completely failed to see it. You are clearly the superior student. I was wrong to have admonished you." He bowed a full, perfect 90 degrees, a gesture of such formal sincerity that Izuku was completely flustered. "And no, please, it's okay. I was just muttering, it's a bad habit." Before he could dig himself a deeper hole of social awkwardness, a cheerful voice cut in. "Oh, it's you! The plain-looking boy who fell." Izuku turned to see the kind girl with the brown bob from the exam. She was beaming at him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You passed. Just like you deserved to. That punch was amazing. It was like BWHOSH. And the way you flew up there. And then you saved me, so thank you." Oachiko Uraraka, she introduced herself, her energy infectious. Izuku's face was on fire. "I am Izuku Midoriya." He managed to get out, his mind a jumble of incoherent gratitude and flustered panic. She was talking to him, smiling at him. She didn't seem to notice his hunched posture or the secret he was trying to hide. Their conversation was interrupted by a new voice, a tired, monotone drawl that seemed to suck all the energy out of the room. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." Everyone froze. Sprawled on the floor behind the teacher's podium, zipped up to his chin in a yellow sleeping bag, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a mess of black hair. He looked like a homeless caterpillar. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, slowly unzipping his cocoon and rising to his feet. He was dressed in a simple black outfit with a long, scarf-like capture weapon wrapped around his neck. "Life is not that long. You're not rational enough." He stared at them, his gaze lingering on each student for a fraction of a second too long. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. A pleasure to meet you." There was no pleasure in his voice. "Right. Put these on and meet me on the P grounds." He tossed the UA gym uniform onto his desk. The locker room was a fresh new hell. Izuku found a corner, turning his back to the room as he changed, his movements quick and furtive. He pulled the blue gym shirt on, sighing in relief. The collar was higher than the school uniforms, a standard crew neck that offered a little more coverage. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. He could feel Bakugo's eyes boring into his back, but for once, the explosive teen said nothing. He just watched, his silence more unnerving than any insult. Outside, the sun was bright and the air was already warming up, the promise of a hot day ahead. Izuku felt the familiar, low-grade anxiety of potential dehydration. A quirk assessment test? Uraraka asked, her voice echoing the confusion of the entire class. But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? There's no time to waste on pointless pleasantries, Aizawa said, his voice flat. The hero course is a full-time job. You've all been using your quirks freely in middle school, but here, you will learn to push them to their limits. He turned to Bakugo. Bakugo. You finished first in the practical exam. What was your best score for the softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo said, his voice laced with bored arrogance. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Bakugo strode into the circle, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his hand crackling with small explosions. With a guttural roar of dai, he threw the ball, unleashing a massive explosion that propelled it like a cannonball. The ball soared through the air, a tiny speck against the blue sky. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped, displaying the result. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in murmurs of awe. That's insane. We get to use our quirks for real. This is going to be so much fun. Fun? Aizawa's voice was dangerously quiet. The air grew cold. You think this is fun? For the next 3 years, Yui will put you through one grueling trial after another. So, new rule. A terrifying, manic grin stretched across his face. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be immediately expelled. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the class. Izuku's blood turned to ice. Expelled? On the first day? His mind raced, a frantic torrent of calculations and despair. He couldn't use one for all. Using it meant breaking himself, and Aizawa would surely see that as a lack of control, a critical failure. But his base abilities, were they enough? In a class full of prodigies with flashy, powerful quirks, could his simple, monstrous strength even compare? This is a rational deception, Aizawa said, his grin fading back into a bored scowl. A way to force you to draw out your full potential. Welcome to Yui High's hero course. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku watched as his classmates showcased their abilities. Ida, with his engine quirk, was a blur, finishing in just over 3 seconds. Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself forward, looking like a human rocket. Uraraka touched her clothes to make herself lighter. When it was his turn, Izuku stood at the starting line, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm. He had to prove he belonged. He couldn't use one for all. He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly on the track. He crouched, not like a sprinter, but lower, like a predator about to pounce. He focused on the raw, dense power in his legs, the inheritance from his father. The starting pistol fired. Izuku didn't just run, he exploded forward. Each stride was a powerful, driving piston of force, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. He wasn't as fast as Ida's mechanical perfection or Bakugo's explosive propulsion, but the sheer, raw power was undeniable. He crossed the line in 5.58 seconds. It wasn't a record-breaking time, but it was far better than a normal human's. He leaned over, panting, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He was already feeling the heat. Next was the grip strength test. This, Izuku knew, was his domain. He took the small handheld device, his fingers wrapping around it completely. He squeezed. He didn't use any special technique, just the pure, unadulterated strength of his fishman muscles. The device's digital display flickered wildly before shorting out with a sharp pop and a puff of smoke. Whoa, seriously? The blonde boy with the lightning bolt, Kaminari, exclaimed. He broke it. That's so manly. The red-haired boy, Kurishima, said, flashing a toothy, approving grin. Izuku looked at the broken device in his hand, then at the shocked faces of his classmates. For the first time, their stares weren't filled with suspicion or fear, but with genuine, impressed surprise. A tiny flicker of pride ignited in his chest. Bakugo, who had scored an impressive 540 kilograms, just stared at him, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The standing long jump was next. Izuku cleared the sandbox entirely, landing with a solid thud on the grass beyond. The repeated sidesteps showcased his surprising agility and powerful core, his score placing him near the top. He was holding his own. He was actually doing it. During a brief pause between tests, as he wiped the sweat from his brow, a voice spoke up beside him, startling him. "You have gills." "Kero." Izuku froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. He turned slowly. A girl with long, dark green hair and large, frog-like eyes was looking at him, her head tilted in frank curiosity. Her name was Tsuyu Azuri, he remembered from the roster. His mind went blank with terror. She'd seen. Of course, she'd seen. He'd been moving, sweating, his collar surely shifting. This was it. The mockery, the disgust, the fish freak whispers, it was all about to start again. He braced himself, his hand instinctively flying to his neck. But the derision never came. "Me too, in a way," she continued, her expression unchanging. "My quirk is frog. I can do pretty much anything a frog can, including sticking to walls and breathing underwater for a while, though I imagine yours are more efficient for that. Do you need to keep them moist?" Izuku could only stare, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on land. She wasn't disgusted. She wasn't afraid. She was curious. Analytical. She had seen the most inhuman part of him, the feature he had spent his entire life hiding, and had responded not with prejudice, but with a simple, logical comparison to her own abilities. It was the most profound, disarming act of acceptance he had ever experienced. Yes, he finally managed to stammer, his voice hoarse. "They get irritated if the air is too dry." "That makes sense," she said with a slow nod. "It must be difficult on hot days." Kero. Before Izuku could form another coherent thought, Ida was there, having overheard. "A non-quirk-based respiratory mutation. Fascinating," he declared, his eyes gleaming with academic interest. "Is it a vestigial trait or fully functional? What is its oxygen extraction efficiency compared to standard human lungs in an aquatic environment? Does it require a higher salinity to prevent osmotic imbalance?" From a few feet away, a boy with two-toned red and white hair watched them, his expression utterly blank. Shoto Todoroki's heterochromatic eyes registered Izuku's presence, took in the gills, and dismissed them with the same cold indifference he showed everything else. He wasn't interested in the biological anomaly. He was only interested in the results. In power, Izuku felt a wave of dizziness, completely overwhelmed. In the span of 30 seconds, his deepest secret had been seen, analyzed, and accepted by 3 of his classmates in 3 entirely different ways. None of them had called him a monster. This pond, it was nothing like the one he had come from. The final test was the softball throw. This was the one. This was the test of pure, explosive power. He watched as Uraraka got an infinity score by making her ball weightless. He saw the others post impressive, but not earth-shattering, numbers. And then it was his turn. He stepped into the circle, the softball feeling small and insignificant in his hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Aizawa's threat of expulsion. Bakugo's burning stare. The hope ignited by Tsuyu and Uraraka. It all coalesced into this single throw. He wound up, preparing to throw with his base strength. It would be a good score. Maybe 150, 200 meters. Enough to keep him out of last place. Probably. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. The teacher's eyes were narrowed, his capture weapon beginning to float around him, his hair levitating slightly. "You're holding back." Izuku froze, the ball still in his hand. "I've been watching you," Aizawa continued, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The dash, the grip, the jump, that's all impressive raw strength. But it's not the power you use to destroy that zero-pointer, is it?" His eyes began to glow a faint, menacing red. "I saw the footage. I saw the energy discharge. That was a quirk. A powerful, uncontrollable one. And you haven't used it once today. Were you planning on crippling yourself again to pass one test and then being useless for the rest of your career? Or were you planning on scraping by with your base abilities while never tapping into your true potential? He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. Let me be clear. A hero who is afraid of their own power is not a hero. They are a liability, a danger to themselves and everyone around them. You have immense potential, more than almost anyone I've ever seen. But potential that is never used is just another word for worthless. If you cannot stand in this circle and show me that you can control even a fraction of that power, then you have no future here. The message was clear. Aizawa wasn't testing his power. He was testing his control. His resolve. Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't use 100%. That would be a catastrophic failure of the test's true purpose. But he couldn't use 0% either. He had to find the middle path. He looked down at his right index finger, the one part of him that hadn't been shattered in the exam. Control it. Focus it. He thought of All Might. He thought of his father's scrolls. The blazing sun and the deep ocean. He had combined them once in a desperate, chaotic explosion. Now, he had to do it with precision. With intent. He took a deep breath, the dry air scratching his throat. He relaxed his body, falling back into the familiar stance of fishman karate. He channeled the energy not through his whole arm, but down a single, focused path, visualizing it as a thin, spiraling current. The technique from the scroll flashed in his mind: Karakusagara Seiken, arabesque tile true punch. A move designed for intricate, penetrating force, not brute impact. Then, he reached for the sun. He didn't open the floodgates. He just cracked the door, letting a tiny, brilliant sliver of one for all, no more than 5%, leak into that spiraling current. The feeling was electric. It was like pouring a drop of pure lightning into a perfectly formed whirlpool. The power amplified exponentially, contained and directed by the principles of his inherited martial art. Red, crackling veins of energy flared up his arm, but they didn't shatter the bone. They followed the path he had laid out for them, converging on his index finger. He threw the ball. At the very last moment, as the ball was about to leave his hand, he released the power with a flick of his finger. There was no deafening explosion like Bakugo's. There was a sharp, whip-like crack that broke the sound barrier, followed instantly by a high-pitched, hissing roar. The softball didn't just fly, it was erased from view. It left behind a perfect, shimmering trail of vaporized moisture in the air, a transient white line that stretched up into the stratosphere. The entire class was silent, their jaws hanging open. The wind from the throw washed over them a second later, kicking up dust and rustling their hair. Izuku stood in the circle, his arm held out, his entire body trembling from the strain. His index finger was broken, a deep, angry purple, but it was just his finger. Not his arm. Not his legs. He hadn't detonated. He had controlled it. He looked at his throbbing finger, a wild, triumphant grin spreading across his face, tears welling in his eyes. Aizawa's device beeped. He turned it around, showing the score to the class. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. But the number wasn't what was important. Bakugo's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and rage. The foundation of his world had just been shattered. Deku, the quirkless, worthless, inhuman pebble, had a quirk. An incredibly powerful one, and he had just used it to beat him. The look in his eyes promised murder. Aizawa looked at Izuku, his tired face split by that same terrifying, manic grin from before. There was no anger in it. Only a predatory, academic excitement. He had presented his student with an impossible problem, and the student had not only solved it but had done so in a way he could never have predicted. He saw the broken finger, the trembling frame, the tears of triumph. He saw the collision of raw power and desperate ingenuity. He saw the glint of something truly special. This kid, Shota Aizawa murmured to himself, the grin widening, is interesting. Izuku Midoriya, standing in the center of the circle with one broken finger, and the astonished eyes of his entire class upon him, finally felt like he wasn't just a fish out of water. He was in a brand new pond, and he had just shown everyone, and himself, that he knew how to swim. The first day of hero training at UA was an exercise in controlled chaos. The morning was filled with standard, mind-numbingly normal classes, English with President Mike, who was surprisingly subdued in a classroom setting, modern hero art history with Midnight, which was distracting, and mathematics, which was just as universally dreaded as in any other school. But through it all, a palpable, electric anticipation hummed in the air. Everyone knew what was coming in the afternoon. Hero basic training. Izuku sat at his desk, trying to focus on the complex equations on the board, but his mind was a turbulent sea. The events of the quirk assessment test had irrevocably altered the landscape of his life. He was no longer just the quiet, muttering boy in the back. He was the kid who broke the grip machine, the kid with the monstrous throw, and, as Tsuyu's blunt observation had subtly rippled through the class grapevine, the kid with gills. The stares he received were no longer just dismissive. They were curious, speculative, and in the case of Katsuki Bakugo, relentlessly, incandescently hostile. Bakugo hadn't spoken a single word to him since the test. He just stared. From across the classroom, Izuku could feel the weight of that crimson gaze, a physical pressure promising retribution. It was the furious glare of a monarch whose divine right to rule had been challenged by a peasant. A slimy, fish-freak peasant. The classroom door was thrown open with such force it slammed against the wall, rattling the windows. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might stood there, not in a teacher's tweed jacket, but in his magnificent Silver Age hero costume. The sheer, unadulterated charisma that radiated from him was a physical force, washing over the classroom and blowing away the last vestiges of academic drudgery. The students erupted in a cacophony of excited shouts and cheers. "It's really him!" Kaminari buzzed. "So this is what a real pro looks like, so manly," Kirishima declared, his eyes shining. Izuku's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. His mentor, his idol, was now his teacher. The reality of it was staggering, a dream so vivid he was afraid he might wake up. All Might strode to the podium, his every movement a display of confident power. "Welcome to the most important class at UA High," he boomed, his smile a beacon of pure heroism. "Here, you will learn the basics of what it means to be a hero. We will forge you in the crucible of combat, and for our first lesson, we're going to jump right in with this." He struck a dramatic pose, holding up a card with a single word on it: battle. "Battle training." Bakugo snarled from his seat, a predatory, ecstatic grin spreading across his face. It was the first sign of positive emotion he'd shown all day. "And to be a true hero, you can't just have the skills," All Might continued, pressing a button on a small remote. From the wall, sleek metal cases slid out with a pneumatic hiss, each marked with a student number. "You need to look the part. These are the hero costumes you designed and submitted before the start of school." A wave of pure, unadulterated joy swept through the class. Izuku felt a jolt of nervous excitement. His costume. He had poured every ounce of his analytical mind into its design, creating something that wasn't just a costume, but a life support system. "Get changed and meet me at ground beta." The changing room was a flurry of activity. As Izuku opened his case, number 17, he felt a swell of emotion. The costume was exactly as he had designed it. It was a full-body jumpsuit of a deep, teal green, reinforced with dark gray armor plating on the shoulders, forearms, and shins. The material itself was a specialized hydropolymer, an experimental fabric designed for deep-sea rescue workers. Its primary function was moisture retention. It would absorb and hold water, creating a microclimate against his skin that would keep him hydrated and his gills functioning optimally even in the driest, hottest environments. Built into the back was a small, streamlined hydration pack, its tubes running discreetly through the suit's interior. A simple press of a button on his wrist gauntlet would release a cool mist against his neck or a small jet of water directly into his mouth. But the most striking feature was the headgear. It consisted of two parts. The lower half was a formidable-looking metal rebreather that covered his mouth and jaw, designed to filter toxins but also to act as a more advanced hydration delivery system when connected to his pack. The upper part was a headpiece with long, fin-like protrusions that resembled All Might's iconic hair tufts, a clear, if somewhat embarrassing, homage to his idol. It left the top of his head and his eyes exposed. He looked powerful. He looked heroic. He looked a little ridiculous. As he finished suiting up, he caught his reflection in the polished metal of a locker. For the first time, he didn't see the awkward, anxious boy. He saw a hero in the making. The costume hid his gills completely, but it didn't feel like he was hiding. It felt like he was protected. Empowered. When Class 1A assembled at the entrance to Ground Beta, the effect was stunning. Everyone looked like they had stepped right out of a comic book. Ida was a knight in high-tech armor. Uraraka was cute and sleek in her pink and black spacesuit-like costume. Kirishima looked rugged and tough, his bare chest and gear-like shoulder pads emphasizing his hardening quirk. Then there was Bakugo. His costume was a masterpiece of intimidation. Grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms, a black and orange X across his chest, and a spiky, explosive-looking mask. He looked like a walking declaration of war. His eyes immediately found Izuku, and they narrowed with a fresh wave of contempt. Ha! Trying to copy me with those big, clunky gauntlets, Deku? He sneered, nodding towards Izuku's armored forearms. Doesn't matter what kind of stupid costume you wear, you're still just a slimy freak underneath. Looking good is part of being a hero, my boys and girls. All Might announced, his booming voice drawing everyone's attention. From this day forward you are all heroes. The exercise was simple. The students would be divided into two-person teams, one hero and one villain. The villains would be tasked with guarding a fake nuclear weapon hidden somewhere inside a multi-story building. The heroes would have 5 minutes to either capture the weapon or incapacitate both villains. And your teams will be decided by drawing lots. All Might declared, pulling out a box. Izuku's heart sank. This was a test of teamwork and compatibility. A random draw was a roll of the dice. He ended up as Team A. His partner was Achiko Uraraka. A wave of relief washed over him. She was nice. She was the one person who had shown him unconditional kindness. His relief was immediately annihilated when the opposing team was announced. Team B, Tenya Ida, and Katsuki Bakugo. The world seemed to shrink, all the noise of the other students fading away until all that was left was the sight of Bakugo's face. He was staring directly at Izuku, and the look in his eyes was no longer just anger or contempt. It was a terrifying, feral joy. The grin that spread across his face was not one of happiness, but of bloodlust. He had been given a gift. A sanctioned, supervised opportunity to utterly destroy the person who had shattered his worldview. Izuku felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a primal fear that had been conditioned into him over a decade of torment. His breath hitched, and the inside of his rebreather began to fog up. Team A will be the heroes, and Team D will be the villains. All Might announced. Everyone else, head to the observation room. As they walked towards the designated building, Uraraka looked at Izuku, her brow furrowed with concern. You seem really on edge, Midoriya. Are you okay? It's just Bakugo, right? He seems to have a real grudge against you. He's... Kaken, Izuku mumbled, the old childhood nickname slipping out. We've known each other since we were kids. He's always been like that. But now, it's different. It's not just bullying anymore. He knows I have a quirk, and he thinks I've been hiding it, mocking him all these years. He's not just angry. He's looking for a reason to kill me. The starkness of his words hung in the air. Uraraka's eyes widened. To kill you? Don't be so dramatic. But even as she said it, she remembered the look on Bakugo's face. It had been genuinely unsettling. Izuku pulled out a small blueprint of the building. His fear was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but his mind, his analytical, tactical mind, was already working. Fear was a liability. Planning was a weapon. Okay, here's the plan, he said, his voice steadier now. It's a 2-on-2 fight. Kaken is almost certainly going to come after me directly. He won't care about the objective. He'll only care about beating me. That's our advantage. He's emotional and predictable. Ida will be the one guarding the weapon. He's logical and defensive, so we split them up. I'll draw Kaken's attention, keep him busy. While I'm fighting him, you use your quirk to sneak past and find the weapon. Your zero gravity is perfect for stealth. Can you do that? Uraraka looked at him, impressed by his sudden shift from terrified mumbling to focused strategist. Yeah, I can do that. But what about you? Can you handle him? Izuku looked at the building, his jaw tightening. I have to, the buzzer sounded. The exercise had begun. They slipped into the building through a ground floor window. The interior was a dark, cavernous space filled with support pillars and concrete walls. It was a maze. Every corner could hide an ambush. He's coming, Izuku whispered, his senses on high alert. The sound came a second later, the distinctive hiss boom of Bakugo's explosions, getting closer and closer. Go! Izuku hissed, pushing Uraraka towards a stairwell. Find Ida. Good luck. She gave him a worried look, then nodded and disappeared up the stairs. Izuku took a deep breath, the filtered air from his rebreather cool and steadying. He turned to face the long, dark corridor, planting his feet in a low, stable fishman karate stance. A blur of orange and black rocketed around the corner. Bakugo, propelled by his explosions, launched himself at Izuku without a word, his right hand already sparking. He threw a wide, telegraphed right hook, not aiming to hit, but to set off a massive explosion right in Izuku's face. But Izuku was ready. He had spent years analyzing Bakugo's every move. He ducked under the swing, the heat of the blast washing over his back, and pivoted on his heel. He drove his fist forward, not with the catastrophic power of One for All, but with the controlled, concussive force of his base strength, aiming for Bakugo's unprotected side. His fist connected with a solid, meaty thud. The blow sent Bakugo staggering, a grunt of genuine pain escaping his lips. He was shocked. He had never been hit by Deku before. Not really. You damn nerd! Bakugo snarled, recovering instantly. He came at Izuku again, this time with a flurry of smaller, faster explosions, trying to overwhelm him. The fight was a brutal, chaotic dance. Izuku was on the defensive, using the pillars for cover, his movements economical and precise. Bakugo was a force of pure aggression, his explosions tearing chunks out of the concrete, filling the air with dust and the acrid smell of nitroglycerin. In the observation room, the other students watched, stunned. Whoa, Midoriya is holding his own against Bakugo. Kirishima exclaimed. No, he's more than holding his own, Todoroki observed, his voice a flat monotone. His movements are reactive, but they're not panicked. He's predicting Bakugo's attacks. His combat prowess is far more refined than his quirk. All Might watched from the front, a grim expression on his face. Young Bakugo is letting his rage cloud his judgment. He's fighting a personal battle, not completing the exercise. And young Midoriya, he's being pushed to his limit. Back in the building, the air was becoming a problem. Bakugo's relentless explosions were generating an immense amount of heat. The corridor was turning into an oven. Izuku could feel the moisture-retaining fabric of his suit starting to warm up. The air was getting thin and dry, each breath a little scratchier than the last. He could feel his strength beginning to wane, a familiar, terrifying weakness seeping into his muscles. Dehydration. His greatest vulnerability. Bakugo noticed it. He saw the slight hesitation in Izuku's movements, the sheen of sweat on his brow. He grinned, a cruel, sharp thing. What's wrong, Fish-ku? He taunted, firing off a series of explosions at the ceiling, bringing down a shower of hot dust and debris. Getting a little thirsty? Feeling a little dried out? He was deliberately making the environment as hostile as possible. He was targeting Izuku's biology. Izuku dodged another blast, his movements becoming sluggish. He pressed the button on his gauntlet. A fine, cool mist sprayed onto his neck and face from inside his costume. It was a momentary relief, a drop of water on a hot stone, but it cleared his head enough to think. He couldn't win a war of attrition. He needed to change the battlefield. He needed water. He feigned a stumble, luring Bakugo in. As Bakugo charged, ready to deliver a finishing blow, Izuku slammed his foot down on the floor. It wasn't a quirk-powered stomp, but a focused application of fishman karate. A shockwave traveled through the concrete, a subtle tremor that Bakugo barely noticed. But a few feet away, a large water main running along the ceiling shuddered violently. A joint, weakened by the constant explosions, burst open. Water, cold and life-giving, gushed from the broken pipe, flooding the corridor in an instant. Bakugo sputtered, soaked to the bone. What the hell? Izuku, however, felt reborn. The cold water washed over him, soaking his suit, cooling his skin, and clearing the dust from the air. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his gills flaring instinctively beneath his costume. The weakness vanished, replaced by a surge of primal power. He was home. You think a little water is going to help you, you damn freak? Bakugo screamed, his rage reaching a fever pitch. He raised his hands, sparks flying, but the water was already affecting his quirk. His explosions were smaller, sputtering with clouds of steam. Izuku moved. In his element, he was a different creature. He was no longer just dodging, he was flowing. He used the inches-deep water on the floor as a weapon. He stomped, sending up sheets of water to obscure Bakugo's vision. He slid through the puddles, his movements impossibly fast and fluid. Bakugo fired off a blast, but Izuku slapped the surface of the water, creating a wave that met the explosion midair, a cloud of steam hissing between them. Stand still and fight me! Bakugo roared, utterly frustrated. Upstairs, Uraraka had found the bomb, guarded by a very in-character Ida who was monologuing about the joys of villainy. Their battle was one of wits and mobility, but down below, the real war was reaching its climax. It's over, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice steady, amplified by his rebreather. You're too angry. You can't win. That was the last straw. You think you can lecture me? Bakugo whispered, his voice dangerously low. You, the quirkless, worthless little secret keeper? You've been looking down on me this whole time, haven't you? He raised one of his grenade-like gauntlets, pointing it at Izuku. You know what these do? They store up my nitro sweat. I can create an explosion as big as I want. In the observation room, All Might's blood ran cold. Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him! He yelled into the comms. He'll be fine as long as he dodges. Bakugo screamed back, a manic light in his eyes. He pulled the pin. The world erupted in fire and thunder. A colossal explosion ripped through the building, blowing out every window on the floor and shaking the structure to its foundations. The heat was so intense it instantly vaporized all the water in the corridor, turning it into a superheated cloud of steam. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was still standing, though barely. He had crossed his armored gauntlets in front of his face, taking the brunt of the blast. His costume was scorched, the armor cracked and smoking. He was alive, but battered and severely dehydrated from the flash of heat. Bakugo, panting from the exertion, stalked forward through the haze. See? You're not dead. Now we can have a real fight. He was cut off as Izuku, moving on pure instinct and adrenaline, charged. This was it. The final clash. He couldn't use a full power smash, but he had one shot. Bakugo, anticipating a punch, prepared to counter with a point-blank explosion, but Izuku didn't punch. He brought his arm up, aiming for the ceiling. He channeled a controlled, 8% burst of one for all, not into his fist, but into his entire arm, using it as a piston. Detroit smash. The uppercut connected not with Bakugo, but with the floor above him. The resulting shockwave tore through the concrete, creating a massive, gaping hole in the ceiling and every floor above it, all the way to the roof. The debris rained down, a chaotic shower of concrete and rebar. In the observation room, everyone gasped. Upstairs, Uraraka and Ida were thrown off their feet by the explosion from below. As the dust settled, Uraraka saw her chance. While Ida was distracted, she leaped, using her quirk to float over a massive chunk of fallen concrete, and wrapped her arms around the nuclear weapon. I've got it! She yelled. The hero team. Wyans! All Might's voice boomed through the building. Down below, the battle was over. Bakugo stood frozen, staring at the destruction, at Izuku. He hadn't been defeated by a punch. He had been defeated by a strategy. Izuku hadn't tried to beat him. He had created a diversion to help his teammate win the objective. The realization was a more devastating blow than any physical strike. He had been outthought. Outmaneuvered. By Deku. Izuku collapsed to one knee, his body screaming in protest. His arm was broken from the smash, and the sudden, intense dehydration had left him dizzy and weak. The steam from the evaporated water still hung thick in the air, but it wasn't enough. As the medics arrived, Bakugo just stood there, trembling with a rage so profound it left him speechless. It was a wound to his very soul, a humiliation he would never forget. Later, in the infirmary, recovery girl Tsute'd over Izuku's arm, healing the clean break with a kiss. "You and All Might," she sighed. "You're both going to be the death of me. This reckless self-destruction, it's a terrible habit." When he returned to the classroom, still sore but mostly healed, the debriefing was already over. He had missed it. He packed his bag in silence, the other students giving him a wide berth, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. He was stopped at the door by Bakugo. Bakugo started, his voice a choked, unfamiliar sound. He wouldn't look at Izuku. "Today. I lost. But that's all. It won't happen again. I'm just getting started." He turned, his fists clenched so tightly his gauntlets creaked. "You hear me, Deku? I will beat you. I'll rise to the top and prove you're nothing but a weird, slimy stepping stone. Just you watch." He stormed out, leaving Izuku standing in the empty doorway. The grudge between them had been broken open, the festering wound exposed to the air. It was no longer a one-sided torment. It was a rivalry, a bitter, hateful, and deeply personal war that had only just begun. And Izuku, for all his fear, knew he wouldn't back down. He couldn't. The tide had turned, and he had to swim with it, no matter how dangerous the current became.